Hey guys, it's JP, and I will be making another video on the hip flexors. Last time, I touched upon what makes up the hip flexors and how this may help with running. This time, I will be going over specifically how the hip flexors may be beneficial as you run at higher intensity speeds, as well as some more advanced exercises to try. Now, as I mentioned before, the hip flexors play an important role as you run, specifically during higher intensity paces, aka sprinting, or during the final kick of a race. The hip flexors primarily act to drive the foot forward after the foot leaves the ground. By improving the ability to do this, it will lead to being able to swing the leg forward faster. This then leads to taking quicker steps, which ultimately leads to faster times. While taking quicker steps can ultimately improve speed no matter the distance, this is especially important in sprinting. Based on some research by Dorn et al. 2012, which looked at muscle strategies for running across different speeds, the strategy to run faster tends to rely more on having a higher step rate. Therefore, working on these muscles may be beneficial for those trying to improve their sprinting speed or their kick at the end of the race. Now, let's go over some new exercises that target the hip flexors. This time, I will be starting with the Bandage so as march. Doing it this way is a great way to begin to engage the hip flexors as well as the core. To do this one, you will start on the floor like so. As the name implies, I loop a band around the feet to incorporate resistance. However, you can do this without the band initially to learn the movement. Now before you start the exercise, remember to try to press the lower back into the ground. This will help engage the core, which is also an important aspect of sprinting. Then, while maintaining one leg still, you will fully extend the other leg all the way. The hip flexors on the side that is stationary is the one being engaged. Also, as you fully extend the leg, you may feel that your back may want to come off the ground. This is because the core has to work more as the leg straightens out, so try to keep it engaged to keep the lower back on the ground. Then, you can alternate sides. When starting this, you can do this with a light resistance loop band, and perform this for 2 to 3 sets of 10 repetitions to learn the movement. As it gets easier, I recommend using a heavier resistance loop band to improve your performance in running. The next exercise I will go over is knee raises. This is a fun exercise to work on hip flexor strength across a larger range of movement. I like this one because the most resistance to the hip flexors occurs in an extended hip position. This actually relates to muscle activity seen during running, as the hip flexors seem to work most when the hip is at its most extended point. Now here, I have her picking up a kettlebell with her feet, but you can also use an ankle or cuff weight around the ankle instead. Then, what you do is try to bring your knee toward your chest as shown. Then, you can slowly lower the foot and repeat. You can initially do this without weight, as this actually becomes a great hip mobility exercise. Then once you feel like you have good mobility, you can incorporate weight to turn it into a strengthening exercise. The last exercise I will go over to target the hip flexors is the Bandage step-up lunge. This is a more advanced exercise that not only works on the hip flexors, but also involves coordination of the other leg muscles such as the quads and glutes in a manner similar to running. To do this one, you'll need a light power band. You can also get away with using ankle weights initially to make it easier. Once you have everything you need, start in a lunge position with the band positioned around the foot like so. Now, before you perform the movement, make sure to keep the core engaged. As I mentioned before, this is important as having a strong core may help keep the pelvis stable and will optimize force output from the legs. Then, you will explode into a tall march position. As you get into this position, try not to lean toward one side and keep the shoulders and hips level. Then, return to starting position and repeat. And those are a few more advanced exercises for the hip flexors that you can try. I hope you guys were able to learn a little more about the importance of the hip flexors and will be able to apply it to your own training program. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching.